Right now, if you take a generic antibiotic in Japan, there is a 70% chance the raw active chemicals inside that pill are controlled by a geopolitical rival.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
Just to let that sink in for a second.
Ah.
We spend so much time talking about the race for semiconductors or, critical minerals. But today, we're looking at a totally different kind of survival.
Absolutely.
We are diving into a stack of notes analyzing a recent massive international agreement between Japan and India. Specifically, we're dissecting their July 2nd Memorandum of Cooperation in pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And, on paper, it sounds like a totally forgettable pile of bureaucratic paperwork. But when you read between the lines, it reveals this covert, high-stakes blueprint for global economic survival.
What's fascinating here is the contrast between what is written on that page and what is actually happening in the real world. It is staggering.
Yeah, completely.
We are looking at a situation where two major global powers are staring at the exact same document, yet they are walking away with two fundamentally opposed realities.
Right, like two different planets.
Exactly. One nation believes they just signed a routine, medical administration update, while the other nation knows they just secured a central pillar of their grand national strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this temperature gap.
Yeah.
Because that right there is the core of our deep dive today. Let's look at the source material.
Sure.
We have these two governments officially announcing the exact same July 2nd agreement coming out of Prime Minister Takaichi's visit to New Delhi.
Yeah.
But the messaging is, it's night and day.
It really is. It's the ultimate tale of two press releases.
Yeah.
If you pull up the announcement from Japan's Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, it is incredibly brief. It reads like a standard Tuesday morning memo.
Right.
They basically outline 4 basic drive points: supply chain resilience, quality control cooperation, human resource development, and R&D.
That's it.
That's it. Japan is framing this strictly within the boundaries of domestic medical administration. They view it as a localized, highly specialized healthcare issue.
Which, if you don't know any better, sounds totally reasonable, right? They are the health ministry after all.
Sure. But then you cross-reference that with India's official announcement, and it is a completely different universe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Indian government isn't just treating this as a healthcare policy update. They are elevating pharmaceuticals to a core pillar of what they call economic security.
Wow.
They're taking pills and cough syrup and placing them on the exact same strategic chessboard as, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and military hardware.
It's kind of like two people signing a contract where one guy thinks he's just hiring a plumber to fix a leaky sink, while the other guy thinks they're forming a lifelong real estate empire.
That is exactly what's happening.
It's a massive disconnect. But why? Why is Japan's view so localized and bureaucratic, while India is out here playing this grand geopolitical game?
Well, the answer lies in the physical mechanics of how a pill is actually made.
Okay.
The Indian summary focuses intensely on strengthening the supply of 2 very specific things: APIs and KSMs.
Let's define those for a second, because that's where the leverage actually sits.
Right. So APIs are active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Okay.
This is the actual drug itself, the chemical that cures your headache or lowers your blood pressure.
And the rest of the pill is just what, like filler?
Exactly. Filler and coating. Now, KSMs are key starting materials.
Right.
These are the raw foundational chemical building blocks required to synthesize the APIs. You cannot manufacture a generic medicine without a reliable supply of both.
And this brings us back to that terrifying 70% statistic you mentioned at the top of the show.
Yep. Japan relies on China and India for roughly 70% of its generic APIs.
That is a staggering amount of dependency for something as critical as basic medicine.
It really is.
It's like building a state-of-the-art electric vehicle industry, but letting your primary geopolitical rival hold the only key to the charging ports.
That is the perfect way to look at it. Japan has realized they are incredibly vulnerable, and several massive global shifts are sort of forcing their hand right now. First, you have the ongoing, intensifying political friction between the U.S. and China,
Oh, sure.
which naturally drags Japan right into the crossfire. Then you look back at the lingering disruptions from the Trump administration's most favored nation tariff policies.
Right, because those didn't just affect steel or soybeans.
Exactly. They caused a massive ripple effect in global shipping and trade routes. It forced countries to abandon those just-in-time inventory models for just-in-case models.
Right.
Add in the COVID-19 pandemic, where borders just slammed shut and export bans were thrown around, And Japan realized just how fragile their medical supply chain truly is.
So they desperately need to pivot away from Chinese dependence.
Absolutely.
But wait, I want to jump in here. If Japan is the third or fourth largest economy in the world, depending on the quarter, and they know this is a critical vulnerability, why are they looking to India?
That's the big question.
Yeah, I mean, why don't they just build the API factories in Osaka or Yokohama? Especially right now with a historically weak yen. Shouldn't that incentivize domestic manufacturing?
You would definitely think so. But you have to look at why Japan stopped making these chemicals in the first place.
Okay, why?
Over the last few decades, the Japanese government has faced a rapidly aging population, which means skyrocketing healthcare costs.
Right.
So to control those costs, the government repeatedly slashed the mandated reimbursement prices for generic drugs.
So they essentially squeeze the profit margins out of their own domestic manufacturers.
Completely. Making KSMs and APIs is a low-margin, high-volume, messy chemical business.
Right.
When the government squeezed the prices, Japanese pharmaceutical companies couldn't survive making these raw materials at home, so they offshored it to China, where labor and environmental compliance were way cheaper.
So over 20 or 30 years, the domestic ecosystem completely hollowed out.
Exactly. Today, Japan simply lacks the chemical engineers, the specialized researchers, and the network of small to medium enterprises needed to run these factories.
And you can't just flip a switch and bring that back.
No, it takes decades of capital and human investment.
So Japan is basically backed into a corner of their own making. They want to decouple from China, but they don't have the domestic infrastructure to do it themselves.
Exactly. Which leaves India sitting across the negotiating table, holding all the cards.
Wow.
And India is playing that hand brilliantly. Since the pandemic, Indian pharmaceutical giants have been aggressively building out their own supply chains to ensure they aren't dependent on China either.
Right.
So when India comes to this July 2nd summit and starts pushing for what the memorandum calls two-way investment, you have to look at the actual mechanism of that phrasing.
Because it's not really two-way, is it? It kind of sounds like a trap.
It's very one-sided in reality.
If I'm Japan, I'm basically funding my own replacement. India wants Japanese capital to build Indian factories so India can turn around and sell the finished chemicals back to the Japanese market.
Precisely.
Are the Japanese bureaucrats doing this willingly, or do they just have a gun to their head?
Honestly, in the short to medium term, they have a gun to their head. They are entirely out of options.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Japan needs a secure, non-Chinese supply chain right this second to ensure domestic stability. India offers that alternative. But the price of admission is Japanese financial investment flowing directly into Indian conglomerates.
Okay, so Japan is essentially buying into an Indian factory to solve a chemical shortage. But running these massive global pharmaceutical supply chains and developing next-generation drugs isn't just about steel vats and raw chemicals, right?
Whoa, not at all.
It requires a massive amount of intellectual capital. How is the flow of talent factoring into this agreement?
This is where the geographic pivot becomes really fascinating. The source notes detail a massive shift in human capital.
Okay.
Historically, if you were a top-tier Indian engineer, data scientist, or pharmaceutical researcher, your primary destination was the United States or Western Europe.
Right, that was the established brain drain route.
Exactly. But two major variables have disrupted that path recently. First, the H-1B visa restrictions and immigration hurdles that tightened significantly during the Trump era made the U.S. a much more difficult door to pry open.
Oh, right.
And second, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence is actively disrupting traditional, lower-level tech and coding jobs globally.
So you have this massive pool of world-class, highly educated talent that suddenly needs a new destination to build their careers.
And Prime Minister Takaichi sees this opening perfectly. Japan recently announced an aggressive plan to accept 500,000 skilled workers from India.
500,000.
Yeah, specifically targeting data scientists and highly skilled tech professionals to integrate into these pharmaceutical and R&D sectors.
Yeah.
Japan is actively trying to absorb this redirected brain trust to make up for their own domestic shortfalls.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If you look at the research notes, there is a secondary factor driving this massive migration that has absolutely nothing to do with corporate strategy or visa policies.
Yeah, this part is wild.
It's entirely cultural.
Sure.
Younger Indian generations are highly motivated to choose Japan because of the massive global cultural penetration of Japanese anime, manga, and video games.
This is a remarkable geopolitical variable. You look at the demographic makeup of high-level scientific conferences in Japan right now, and the shift is undeniably visible.
Really?
Oh, yeah. There is a massive influx of Indian as well as Chinese students and researchers deeply integrating into Japanese academia and pharmaceutical research labs.
And I imagine they are pretty good at what they do.
They are formidable. They are operating at the highest levels of education. They are often trilingual, speaking their native language, fluent English, and increasingly fluent Japanese.
Wow.
And they are fiercely competitive.
We usually talk about anime and gaming as like soft power or just entertainment exports.
Right.
But the data here suggests Pikachu and Mario are acting as literal, measurable economic magnets for high-level pharmaceutical data scientists. That is wild.
It really is.
But if you think about the actual implementation, what does that look like on a Tuesday morning at a pharmaceutical headquarters in Tokyo? Like, how does this massive influx change the day-to-day culture?
Well, it is triggering a severe culture clash and a full-blown competitive crisis for the Japanese domestic workforce.
Okay, how so?
The source material is surprisingly blunt about this. It points out that Japan's younger generation of researchers came up through what was known as the Yutori education policy.
The relaxed education system.
Exactly. It was a system specifically designed to be more relaxed and less pressure-filled than previous generations.
Right, trying to reduce student stress, which is, a noble goal socially.
Socially, perhaps.
Yeah.
But economically, it means these young Japanese researchers are suddenly finding themselves flanked in their own laboratories by foreign peers who survived the absolute pressure cooker educational systems of India and China.
Oh, man.
The warning in the notes is stark. Young Japanese researchers are currently completely outmatched.
Outmatched.
Yeah, if they don't fundamentally change their work ethic and intensity, they're going to be permanently outpaced by this highly skilled, bilingual foreign workforce operating inside their own country's corporations.
That is an incredible dynamic to visualize. You have older Japanese executives bringing in foreign talent to save their supply chains, but in doing so, they're exposing the glaring weaknesses of their own domestic educational pipeline.
Yeah, it's a huge paradox. Which brings us to the final and frankly most revealing layer of this memorandum,
Let's hear it.
the regulatory reality check. Because if India is providing the raw materials, housing the physical factories, and exporting the top-tier talent, you have to ask who is actually in charge of this partnership.
Right. Let's look at the regulatory side. The MOA outlines specific technical cooperation between the two regulatory bodies. So that's Japan's PMDA and India's CDSCO.
Correct.
And the document says they are going to cooperate on GMP inspections, which stands for Good Manufacturing Practices and Quality Control Training.
Right, and if you just read the text, it is framed as though Japan, the advanced G7 developed nation, is graciously imparting its superior regulatory wisdom to India.
Which seems to make sense on paper.
On paper, yeah. But according to the analysis, there is a massive, deeply ingrained misconception among Japanese bureaucrats. They operate under the assumption that India is technologically and regulatorily behind them.
So they view themselves as the teachers in this scenario.
Exactly.
But if we look at the actual global market, that assumption is completely backward, isn't it?
It is entirely backward. Major Indian generic pharmaceutical companies are some of the most sophisticated global players on the planet.
Right.
They are incredibly adept at navigating the United States FDA and other stringent international regulatory bodies.
Let's explore how they got so good at that, though. Because it wasn't by accident.
No, it was out of pure necessity. Historically, India's domestic market didn't have the purchasing power to sustain the massive output and margins these companies needed to grow.
So they had to look outward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To survive, Indian pharma had to conquer the US and European markets decades ago. They were forced to learn how to perfectly navigate the FDA's labyrinth of rules, audits, and English language documentation. It is literally their core business model.
Well, the Japanese companies were doing what?
Well, Japanese generic companies were enjoying a highly protected, incredibly lucrative domestic market.
Oh, I see.
They suffered from what is often called the Galapagos syndrome. They evolved in perfect isolation to serve only the Japanese healthcare system.
Wow.
As a result, they are actually lagging significantly behind India when it comes to international regulatory compliance and global export standards.
So, wait. Let's connect this to Japan's broader economic goal. Japan wants to build globally competitive CDMOs.
Correct.
And let's define CDMOs for the listener.
Yeah.
Think of a CDMO like the Foxconn or the TSMC of the pharmaceutical world.
Right.
They don't necessarily invent the drugs. They are the massive, highly sophisticated factories hired by the big pharmaceutical brands to physically manufacture the pills at a global scale.
Yeah.
It's a hugely profitable business model.
Exactly. Japan wants to capture those massive global manufacturing contracts. But to successfully run a CDMO on a global scale, you need deep, battle-tested expertise in international regulations and the ability to seamlessly process complex English language regulatory documents.
Which we just established Japan severely lacks.
Precisely. In the arena of global pharmaceutical compliance, Japan desperately needs to learn from India's playbook.
This is where the psychology of this agreement absolutely fascinates me. I mean, India knows they are miles ahead in global regulatory expertise.
Oh, they definitely know.
Yet they sit at the negotiating table and allow Japan to write a document where Japan gets to play the benevolent teacher imparting wisdom on good manufacturing practices.
Brilliant.
India is willingly playing the role of the humble student in the classroom, letting the teacher feel important, all while secretly holding the answer key to the final exam.
It is an incredibly shrewd display of strategic humility.
Yeah.
India plays along with the optics of technical cooperation because it strokes the ego of the Japanese bureaucracy.
Right.
And by doing so, India effortlessly secures exactly what they actually came for: the Japanese financial investment to build their factories and guaranteed long-term access to the Japanese pharmaceutical market.
But if Japan is operating under such a massive blind spot about their own global standing, how can they possibly enforce the terms of this agreement? I mean, if you don't even realize you are being outplayed, how do you protect your own economic security?
That is the existential question for Japan's industrial future. The analysis notes explicitly state that recognizing this gap is the only way forward.
Okay.
If Japan continues to operate with this top-down, slightly condescending bureaucratic approach, they are going to miss the actual value of the partnership.
They won't learn anything.
Exactly. They won't absorb the vital regulatory insights they need from Indian firms. They'll simply end up financing India's total dominance of the Asian pharmaceutical market. For this MOSU to actually serve Japan's long-term interests, the bureaucracy has to drop the pride. They need to recognize India's superior global expertise and engage in a genuinely equal partnership where Japanese firms actively learn how to navigate the FDA and global supply chains from their Indian counterparts.
If you look at the raw data, it's really a masterclass in economic statecraft.
It really is.
Let's bring all of this together because the sheer scale of what is happening beneath the surface of this one document is staggering. We started with a seemingly boring piece of administrative paperwork about medical cooperation.
Right.
But when you peel back the layers, you see a desperate developed nation trying to patch up a fragile China-dependent supply chain that they accidentally hollowed out over 30 years of price cuts.
Yep.
And on the other side, you see India expertly leveraging every single asset they possess. They're using their massive physical manufacturing capacity, their highly educated, highly motivated, anime-loving data scientists, and their deep, battle-tested mastery of global regulations.
All to pull Japanese capital right into their own industrial base.
It's exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves exactly why you can never take official government announcements at face value.
So true.
Reading them requires looking past the acronyms and the administrative jargon to map out the physical realities of the supply chain. For you, listening right now, the ultimate realization is that the generic medicines sitting in your bathroom cabinet are not just basic healthcare products.
Right.
The journey of that pill from a raw chemical vat in India through a complex web of international talent migration to a Japanese pharmacy is the end result of these exact geopolitical chess moves and deeply strategic, sometimes quietly deceptive international partnerships.
It really changes how you look at a simple bottle of cough syrup or antibiotics. It's a physical manifestation of global leverage.
Truly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We started this conversation by comparing this agreement to a contract where one guy thinks he's hiring a plumber and the other is quietly building a real estate empire. And I want to leave you with one final, broader thought to mull over as you go about your day. We just saw how effectively India utilized strategic humility, willingly playing the subservient student to stroke the bureaucratic ego of a developed nation, all while quietly securing the capital they need and already possessing superior global know-how.
Yeah.
Think about how perfectly that psychological tactic worked. Now, project that outward. Look at the other critical industries shaping our future. Think about the physical hardware required to run artificial intelligence, or the massive global infrastructure build-out for green energy and battery supply chains.
Oh, wow.
How many other rising economies are currently sitting at negotiating tables with established Western powers, utilizing this exact same psychological blueprint?
It's a great question.
How many nations are happily playing the humble plumber, quietly reshaping critical global supply chains and securing massive investments, while the established powers don't even realize they are handing over the keys to the future? Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging.